Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Fateless podcast episode. And we have got some of the most active members of the internal design team here for the game that's going to be coming your way from Fateless Games. And we wanted to touch on a topic today about RNG. It's obviously one of the bigger elements in game with a lot of hot takes. Some people like elements of RNG, some people hate it. So we're going to talk about what's good RNG, what's bad RNG, and what's our current kind of philosophy in designing our games. Let's go ahead and introduce the guests joining me today. I'm going to start with Paul. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. RNG is such a hot topic. Some people love it, some people hate it. You know me, I hate it. We often, in our little discussions we have in game design topics and things, I'm always on the I hate RNG. Don't give me RNG. Whenever the hint of the word RNG, I get angry. I get angry.
Great, awesome. Well, and then how you doing today, Dirk? Good to see you.
Yeah, doing pretty good. And I think I'm kind of with Paul, I guess, as a short. I always get frustrated by it, but I think it's one of those tools that, like, when it goes your way, you're just like, oh, I'm so good at this game. When it doesn't go your way, you're like, I hate RNG. So that's probably why I find it more frustrating than I don't know, than enjoyable. But I'm sure I benefited from it quite a bit. So there's a reason for it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I even remember I think I tend to agree with you guys. Although we'll talk about a little bit more in depth because I do think some elements are necessary. But I remember even as a kid, let me know if you guys agree or disagree with this. I remember as a kid playing Mario Kart. I was always asking my friends, like, can we disable items? Because I hate the randomness of, like, you get the red turtle and I don't, so you win, and that's BS. I want it to come down to who's the best driver. I don't want any items or anything. So I don't know if you guys agreed with that as a kid or not, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I've never used to play a lot of Mario Kart, and to be honest, RNG's only been something that I've had to deal with since I started playing more mobile games, because I used to play a lot of like MMOs, Lord of the Rings Online, World of Warcraft, where generally RNG is some idiot has clicked the mushroom or some idiot is not standing in the right place, and that's why your team is all of a sudden dying. It's not really random most of the time when it comes to raiding. It's normally Joe Blogs, or as they say, the guy that went running in on World of Warcraft. I always forget his name.
Leroy Jenkins.
Leroy. Yeah, that's normally the
Leroy
problem.
Jenkins.
That is normally the problem when it comes to those kind of type of games. But obviously, when I've moved into things like Raid and a lot of mobile games, RNG is a mechanic that is introduced across a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, but it also makes sense in some cases. I don't know. I feel like there's always an argument for good RNG and there's always an argument for bad RNG. And if you take away that RNG, then you always end up in the situation where it's like, oh, okay, well, it's boring, or you get kind of like lose interest in it.
For sure. Go ahead, Dirk. What was your perspective on that? As a kid, was that common, or other games you played, or
Well, like with Mario Kart, I mean, at least different places, I can only get, like, in first place, you're never getting like the good items. When you're in like the deep pits of last place, you're getting all the best items. And then when you're closer to first, your frequency of good items goes down. So there is like a meaning to it. Like, it's kind of the catch up mechanic. And yeah, like when you're at first, you're not getting lightning bolts or blue shells, obviously. And this is part of the game. So it comes down to almost like a balancing act of, like, you don't want to, unless you could take a commanding lead, you don't want to, just be riding first and then expect to keep it at the very end. So, like, I guess in my take is, when you can kind of play around the RNG or play to it, I think it's fine. Like, I've always, like, my favorite games probably like are card games. Honestly, like, I grew up playing Magic the Gathering. I played a ton of Hearthstone for a while. I did pretty well in that. And I mean, I know you play a lot of poker, Brad, and so did I. I guess back in college, and those games are all about playing RNG essentially, but it's all about, like, knowing the odds. You can't rest too much on just a single bad beat. It's all about, over enough hands, your RNG isn't going to matter. It's just kind of your skill will, and knowing the odds, playing around it, trying to play the person. Like, that's the actual skill of the game. So to say, like, RNG takes away from skill, like, yeah, on like a game by game sometimes, but over in the long run of like a career or something, certainly not.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important topic. Like, we should speak about the elephant in the room. Everyone knows it. The 3%. anyone who's played Raid right now is all like cringing inside the 3%. Those are the types of RNG mechanics that I absolutely despise, because you as a player, you can't like you said, Dirk, with a lot of RNG, you can almost like give yourself a weighted RNG where, you know, there's a very good chance that you're going to get a good rollout, or there's a very good chance the odds will fly in your favor. It won't be guaranteed, but there's an art in terms of like loading the dice in your favor. Whereas some of these RNG mechanics in games, like just straight up 3%, like it's just not thing I can do. I can't
Paul,
strategically build around it.
Based on you talking about that topic, I did want to ask you or give you a chance to explain. I know in some of our design meetings, I've heard you talk about RNG that you like and RNG that you don't like. So for the audience out there, could you clarify your position on what you think good RNG is and what bad RNG is?
Oh, he's put me on this hot seat there. Yeah, so like for me, I don't like things like 3% mechanics, right? I understand why they were created, and a lot of people will probably like, you know, would ask a valid question. What's the point of a 3%? Why does it exist? Well, we can clearly tell in Raid they did it because they wanted to have a unique subset of champions in their game that could do something guaranteed. Because obviously they had stuff that was resistance free, where it just, you didn't need accuracy. But they wanted to have like this unique crop of champions that could do things like Siphi A1 and Ghostborn, where it's like, okay, this character is special because it's one of the only ones that can do it on a guaranteed basis. And I feel that's pretty lame, if I'm being honest, because that's the type of RNG I really don't like. I don't like it when a player literally has no control, when you cannot do anything about it other than not do it. Polymorph is a great example of terrible RNG. Like basically you can't really stop it other than just not bring debuffs. And then it's like, okay, well, like I can't use a good proportion of my champion pool because this RNG mechanic that may or may not trigger, but seems like it always triggers, even though it's only 25%. So for me, that's what I would call bad RNG, where a player can't actually make a clever or strategic thought, a bit like what Dirk was saying, to give themselves an opportunity to succeed, because effectively they're just frustrated by like a base standard of there's a 3% chance it just will never go in your favor. And that happens quite a lot.
I would push back on that a little bit, because I think Plarium would argue, well, there is a way around it for the player. You can pull for a champion like Ghostborn and find a way to include them in your team. But I do agree with 90% of what you were saying.
Yeah.
And then, so for me, just to kind of go off of your topic there, a bad RNG example to me is when they introduced Fear and True Fear. I would rather have it do something half as impactful, but happen all the time. Like, because you go into these arena matches and it feels like your Masha lead is like 10% chance and theirs is 95. And it's like, it always feels like crap.
It's not 50%, is it? It's like
yeah,
75% and 25% for you. It's never 50% for you, but it's always 50% for them.
Yeah. Exactly, but before I ramble too much, I'll let Dirk kind of jump in on what's talking about.
Yeah, I should point out Fear, because Fear is like one of those miserable experiences in Raid. It was just like your whole team's Fear. You're like, all right, well, let's see what happens here. Half team should be able to take this. No, it's okay, 100%. And it's just it's just so rage inducing when it goes against like what you expect like the odds to be, and that's why I said like, well, sometimes when you're going and you're feared, and your whole team is just like, Fear, what's that? And just take their turn like nothing happened. You're not like thinking like, oh yeah, I got lucky. You're just thinking like, yeah, expected. Like it. So that's why, I don't know. But again, it just creates frustration, because if I don't remember the times where I got lucky or like appreciate that, and I only remember the times where it sucked and I hated it, then like, is that a good mechanic, or is it just something that people hate? And that's kind of like where I'm prefer to avoid that. Like anytime you have like coin flip mechanics like that, or just even if it's like small chance to do something, I don't think it could be a huge effect. Like 50% chance to do nothing or completely skip your turn and put your skill on cooldown. That's a big difference. It's not like it's not like 50% chance to do 10% more damage. You know what I mean? Where it's like, cool, great, but if you lose, it's not like you just lost the match. And that's where I think like mechanics like that are just terrible. When there's so much riding on a coin flip, it just feels like it takes everything else out of that fight.
Yeah. It's especially when you can't really control it. Sometimes, like a classic example is the Torment Head in Hydra, right? There's a lot of people would argue there's a counter. You bring Veil, but I'm like, well, there's like 3 champions in the game that can do it out of like 900 in a raid example. And you kind of sit there and go, well, that's not really ideal. And it's so, as you said, impactful that it's almost like right now I have to like engineer my entire team around either like bringing one champion to solve all the problems that one head gives. And it feels really like almost like essentially the RNG is forcing you to be less flexible and creative with your team design, because you effectively have to always have a solution. If you don't, and it might be the head doesn't even show up half the time, but you know the moment it does, it runs over. So you have to build for it. And though that's where RNG can get out of control. Now, I will say where RNG is good is when you can like high roll stuff. Things like strong hitting is good RNG in my opinion, because it doesn't impact the outcome of the fight, but you might get lucky. Or things like you've got an extra chance to hit. Like Alika's A1 is a great example of something that I think is good RNG, where it just has an extra chance to repeat the attack, which is kind of crazy. It's great fun, but it's never going to break the game. It's never going to like make your run not work. That's good RNG in my opinion. I think that's and it's very difficult to make good RNG because generally players want things to happen regularly. You know, it's like if you said like I pull a shard and you're going to guarantee yourself to get a Siffy, they're like, great, this is the best system in the world. But that's not really practical. But then most people would want to pull a void shard and go, I didn't get a Siffy. This is the worst system in the world, right? It's very hard to balance these things.
Yeah, I think summoning is a good example of good RNG probably, because you don't want the game will kind of become just transactional and unfun if it's like pull 100 void shards and you get Siffy. Everybody's like, well,
yeah,
but at the same time they do guaranteed events and they end up being successful. And in a lot of these modern gacha mobile hero collector games, that's becoming pretty popular. And like the people that play the game are enjoying that, and those games are seeing success of leaning in the direction of having a blend of summoning events. I know that's a completely different topic, but I was gonna ask you in relation to like Helm Smasher and Giant Slayer. Would those be good examples of RNG or bad examples?
I think those are good in my opinion, again, because as long as the RNG is a positive gain, not a negative punishment, that's generally where I think the line is set, right? So if I have a 60% chance to do a bit more damage on the boss, great. Is that going to make my run slightly inconsistent on times? Yes. Will it cause my run to fail? No. Whereas if the fear doesn't work, in Dirk's example, it's like, well, that's it, my run's over. I might as well just quit the arena fight. Like if polymorph procs and I don't instantly get out of polymorph because it's a 2-turn, I might as well just quit the fight, because at 150 speed, that sheep is not becoming a non-sheep. It's just never going to happen. So as long as I think the RNG is like, it's not it doesn't always have to be a positive gain, but if you create RNG that always results in a negative gain, that's always going to be like a problem for a player, I think. So things like Helm Smasher only can positively improve you. If it doesn't roll, you don't get as much damage. That might cause you to not complete it in the kind of time you want or the turns you want, but it generally doesn't normally result in you failing, right? You might do like on a boss fight, you might do 20 million less damage or something, but it's probably not going to cause you to fail. You might just have to rerun it.
Yeah, so a bad example of Helm Smasher would be 50% chance to do double damage or 50% chance to do 0 damage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Affinity is a very good example where it can be positive, but it also can be incredibly negative. As if you engineer, right? Affinity is designed for you to go, okay, the enemy is spirit, I need to bring something that's strong affinity or neutral affinity, which is fine. What we see now in Raid, and I speak Raid because I think this is quite a good example, is when they force you to pick a specific affinity into that negative affinity. It's just the most horrendous experience in the world, because that is not what you're meant to do with that system. It is designed to force you to find champion diversity, which is why it's not, in my opinion, such a bad thing, affinity, as a negative. But when you force the RNG, that's when it becomes negative.
I definitely agree with the affinity thing as being pretty good RNG, because it's like I said, it's something in your control. You're supposed to look at it and say, okay, well, I just don't bring the weak affinity, I bring the strong one. Now I get the option to high roll. It was my choice. If I brought the weak affinity and I get weak hits, that was like my fault for doing it, and I'm punished for it. So it's anytime like you're in control of it and it's something, that I took that risk, then I have to own up to it. Like that's on you then. So yeah, I do think it's a good one. Even like other big high roll ones, like where you can get real lucky and win because of it. Like I pulled Fuxian as like my first non-void legendary, man, he certainly wasn't meta. So this was never something that would cause frustration of you having to go against, like, cause no defense team had Fushan. But man, there was those times where you're down, you're like, oh, this fight's not going so well because everyone's just some jank team with Fushan. And all of a sudden he just like just one shots like a Duchess. You should never
His
be able to
A1.
do that. But he just gets like 6 hits off his A1. You're like, oh, I guess I'm winning this fight after all. And then like like it's a great high roll moment that like made me love that character despite him kind of being, subpar. So because of that, it was like what would have been a disappointing legendary pull. I got a lot of enjoyment out of that character because of that non-meta high roll. So yeah, there's times where it can create a lot of fun and exciting moments.
Yeah, and I think on the negative affinity is a very good point there. Like, equally as much as it can frustrate you as a player if you're bringing negative affinity, it gives you as an opportunity as a player to force the enemy into a bad situation. So if you know you're fighting a very difficult content, then you can bring strong affinity to benefit you the other way, right? So it can give you the RNG in your favor. So the enemy might weak hit you some more times, and that's a strategy you can employ. Again, I think it's a very good point about what you can control. The worst form of RNG is something that negatively impacts you and you have absolutely no control over it. If that is in a game, that normally will lead to like players just like, I hate this game, I'm going to quit. That's almost like, it must be the case, because if you can't control it and you just get punished for it and there's nothing you can do, that's just a horrible feeling.
Yeah, I don't get like the 3% like dismiss. Otherwise, it can just only cause frustration. Like you met the accuracy requirement for the fight. You got the gear for it, which took probably a lot of farming, a lot of gear swapping. You got it. Your character's set up. You have plenty of accuracy. There's no reason to miss, and 3%, I guess this run just fails.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating. And I guess like, oh, the other way around is you always have a 3% chance to land it. But when are you ever going into an encounter like hoping for that? You know what I mean? You're never like, all right, you know what? 3% of the time I can go in here with 0 accuracy and land my defense down. No, you're going to obviously get the accuracy you need for it. So like, you're never getting the benefit of the other way the 3% works. You're only getting hosed by the negative. And like, that's why it's just, there's nothing but frustration from the mechanic. So it's just, yeah, it's something that I don't think any of us appreciate or want to implement in our own.
Would there be a
it goes 100%.
Would there be just to play devil's advocate? Would there be an argument for hey, maybe it at least gives hope to maybe a free to play player. They're going up against somebody who spent more than them. They have a better team. It's like, well, at least I might get lucky and they might miss their debuff, and now I can actually feel like I have a chance versus somebody better than me. Would there be an argument for that at all?
I mean, for me, that's just like, I didn't actually win. The game just felt sorry for me. You know what I mean? It's like in my head, I didn't like outsmart the opponent or come up with a new strategy or find some way to build my character in a specific way that countered them. It was literally just like, oh, the game felt sorry that I didn't do it well enough, and just I won because the game felt, oh, it gave me an extra sheep and I won because I just feel dirty when it happens to me. Honestly, I feel like I should go take a shower whenever I get good RNG like that. To me, it's just. Yeah, I'm not a fan of those sorts of things. I think, if anything, if the game mode is structured in a way that nobody feels like it can be, like, you always have like Krakens, right? We know this. There's no way that you can get around the fact that if you spend the most money, you will probably be number one in any sort of ladder arena. But that doesn't mean you can't engineer systems in a way that people can still feel like they get success. And I think the biggest failure on most games when it comes to almost like trying to sell the dream of a free-to-play that can beat a Kraken is almost like, oh, well, we gave you a chance and look, you succeeded. So there's always a chance you could beat the Kraken. I feel like that kind of false fantasy that they kind of sell you is just terrible. I'd much rather them just create an environment where someone who doesn't want to spend as much money can still feel like they gain success, either through sort of like, structures of game modes and different things like that, rather than trying to sort of bait them into thinking that they have a chance. Because I've seen so many, like Diablo Immortal used to be the case where it's like people believed, look, you don't have to be paid to win. And then they finally reached the Kraken tier and they were like, get me out of this hell, please. And then you see it now in Raid where you get to goal 4. It's like, oh no, I'm doing great. I'm winning in goal 3. And then the moment they get to goal 4 and they face the mythical wave of +4 mythicals, they're like, oh dear Lord, get me out, please. Send me back to the pits.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that stuff going on. I'm not gonna call out any names, but I saw like Diablo Immortal creators being like, I'm free to play and I'm in the highest rank, and they're queuing with a bunch of whale Krakens as their friends on their team that are carrying them. Yeah, so It's always going to be an advantage in a game like Diablo Immortal or Raid. It's hard to completely get around that without like a normalized mode. I know I don't know. I think Diablo Immortal, they might have a normalized PvP mode. I know they have a normalized mode called the Fractured Plains,
Yeah, they
where
might do.
but they may have. Somebody can let me know in the comments. It's been a
Yeah.
long time since I played Diablo Immortal, but they may have addressed that a little bit.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be normalized. It just has to be like you just have to give the like people who try to sell the fantasy that free to play players can compete with whales and then try to force them into brackets and like almost as if, well, if you don't spend, you'll get there. I feel like that's just a mistake. If people want a whale, they will. You don't have to like trick them to whaling, but at the same time, you want to give them like good places to where you don't essentially you don't want to give them RNG to try and feel like they can win because they don't feel like they were successful. They just feel like they got lucky. That's not really a good feeling, in my opinion.
Especially if it's something that they didn't like plan. If it's just like a core mechanic in the game, like there's no reason like you can't have Fushan type characters in the game that are like not the best pick. Whales probably wouldn't even use them, but they give you high roll, potential. So if you want to go in there, like, okay, I have no chance to beat this guy with my standard roster, but I do have this guy, and he's pretty funny, and sometimes he can clutch out a win. So I'll try it. And then yeah, if you want to bring David against Goliath like that, that's fine because like sometimes it'll work. Most of the time you're just gonna go into it and still lose anyways. And
It can get pretty brutal though when that character is the meta, like we
yeah, you pick
saw.
Rotos.
Yeah,
Relentless.
exactly. I was gonna say Rotos.
Yeah, when Rotos would take like 7 turns in a row because his Relentless kept proccing, they had to just like stealth.
Oh, that was horrible.
Relentless because of that. Yeah, that's what I mean. As long as and like I played a ton of Hearthstone back in the day, and like Hearthstone was famous for, I'm sure it still is, but was famous for its RNG being a little bit out of control sometimes. But for the most part, like as long as the strongest thing you can do isn't just random like RNG effects, then it's totally fine. But like when you say like when the meta, like I remember for a while the meta was like Yogg Saron, and it was like just play this card and a bunch of random stuff happens, and then you might win, you might lose. It's like, well, that's kind of dumb if we sit here for 20 minutes playing a game
On
and you
Dirk,
play one card that just completely negates the entire like up until that point.
maybe you have some insight on this. How bad was the RNG on Hearthstone? Like, a top 10 player in the world, if they played the arena, would they ever go like 0-3? Or was it like guaranteed they're gonna win at least like 4 or 5, even with a horrible deck?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if I ever, I'm sure I had some 0-3s, but like very far and few between. Whereas like I would average once they added the 12 win in, I was hitting a 9-win average. Like I was pretty solid at arena in that, and it was like you almost like never would get terrible because some people were just so bad at that game that like no amount of good RNG could save them either. And but I mean that's the arena. Even in standard, like you get bad beats all the time, but you just gotta grind it out. Like any card game you're playing, I mean, you can't, if it's like a best of 3 tournament, like that's gonna be rough. But when you're just playing ladder, like it's gonna take you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games to kind of settle into your spot. But like every single season, everyone settles in about the same rank that they were the season before. So like it was fairly decent in terms. I started to get a little bit more over time, just more and more RNG effects to make it seem less and less competitive. Where like because early in Hearthstone's days, like the same people would win tournaments week after week after week. You'd see all these esports, a lot of esports back then, and it's always the same people at the top. Then like as more and more expansions came out that got a little crazier, it was very unpredictable. Like you'd see every tournament would have a million new people that just RNG their way into it. You never knew who was going to win. It just turned into like a total cluster of it. Just like where it started, it just lost its fun. It lost the appeal to watch it because I'm like, well, this is, you don't know, you can't even tell
That's the tough line to walk. Because what drove me away from Honor Duel in AFK Journey was I felt like my performance didn't matter. I felt like, okay, I get lucky in the shop or I don't, and I go 0-3 or 9-0. Like, I don't actually have any input here. But in Hearthstone, I feel like it was a pretty good blend of RNG. Like it was kind of like poker. Like over a large sample size, I do feel like I can have an impact, but in any individual run, I can get horrible luck.
Yeah, and like good players are always gonna over a long run end up at a way higher average. So that's the fun of any card game is that you can like, I don't know, I guess you could feel it too. Like you win more than you lose. The game is enjoyable, and you can certainly win more than you lose, even with RNG mechanics, as long as you're playing the parts that you can control well, and the people aren't, so you will come out on top.
Yeah, it
But
was a bit
yeah,
like
no,
that
I
in
understand what you're saying
TFT.
with the honor duel. Oh, what's
It
it?
was a bit like that in TFT as well. Like I used to play TFT back in the day, and you had strategies, right? You still random. You didn't know what it was going to give you every time you got your turn. You didn't know what the enemy was going to do. You still had to work around, but you had strategies. You could either go like economy, go like an econ route, right? Protect your economy and then go for big high rolls towards the end, or you could try and do like a fast upgrading strategy where you can get those, and then you're kind of like hoping for good RNG that you're going to get the right heroes out of the deck. But it was always like in a weighted opportunity, like we talked about. It's kind of like, well, I know if I go early, I'm more likely to get tier one sort of cards out of the deck. And therefore, if I get them before everyone else, I know how many's in the deck, and you kind of like can play the game of RNG. I'm never going to guarantee that, like, if I take either strategy, there's always chances that it just doesn't go my way. I get super horrible luck, and I just go, do you know what? That game was bad. But on average, if you build the games correctly, then you should be able to create a strategy and then try and almost like not so much brute force, but you can like force your way to the strategy you want to try and achieve. And most of the time, you'll feel like that your decisions actually improved it. And that's a good example of where RNG can be good. I mean, it's good. It's always good to fail sometimes. It's always good to have that moment in time where it's like, okay, I went super hard on this strategy. I didn't get my luck. And then it's like, that's terrible. It feels awful at the time, but it does make you feel good the next time you try it and it goes, oh, this worked out really well this time. So it's just like a balance for me. When it comes to RNG, it has to be something the player can control, and it's not always just in like and sort of what's the right word for it? Like inevitable. Inevitable bad RNG is the worst game design concept anyone's ever come up with. And if you find it in a game, it's just going to annoy people. And there's no largely I found majority of the time, there's not really any reason for it. You don't need it. There's not like it's a compelling existential requirement for it to exist that you get these bad RNG. Even like mercy summoning and stuff like that, right? Summoning has some sort of way for you to strategically use your summoning crystals and stuff so you can actually get to a situation where you get close to mercy and you go, I'm just going to wait for that next times 10 or that next times 15 so I can get a good payout. So the odds are in my favor. But like just some systems in games, like 3% is probably the worst thing I've ever come across. I get it. I know why they made it. But I don't think I've seen any player actually have a positive report about why 3% was useful. Even the other way, if you think about it. Because if you haven't, like Dirk said, built for the effect, there's probably a very good reason why you don't want to land those effects. So if you 3% randomly land that effect, you're like,
Right, that's
no, it's
yeah.
like I don't want to. Like, especially when you got things like polymorph and different things like that. It's like I don't want to land this debuff. I really don't want to. And you 3% land a debuff, sheep your main character and carry, and then you've lost the fight. And it's like great. So I'm screwed both ways. You don't want either of them.
Yeah, no, I love it, and now all of you can see that our daily design meetings end up being therapy sessions for Paul to vent about Raid Shadow Legends because he's still full time covering that game.
You should have seen the amount of hours probably me and Papa Drock remissed over polymorph and how much hatred we have for that debuff and how much that has destroyed arena metas. And like it used to be pretty rough having debuffs because of Resurgent, right? I mean, another example of RNG in Raid Shadow Legends is Resurgent Mastery. 50% chance when I take 25% of my health to get rid of a debuff. Now, it's not a bad RNG mechanic, except for the fact that it applies per hit. So if you have someone like Romanto, who just happens to have pretty good multipliers, you have this horrible feeling where it's like, okay, well, the first debuff lands, the second debuff lands, I've done more than 25%. So it's removed one of the ones that I've just placed. And his secondary component of that ability is if he places all 4 debuffs, you get a fear. So it's almost like, well, wait, so I can't actually stop the enemy no matter how strong you build, like how weak you make his damage, because he's just got such good multipliers. He ends up being just a problem where he will out damage the enemy, which means that you then lose the fear control, which you would really like to have. It's like even those kinds of RNGs are bad because of the way they're programmed, right? The actual concept is fine. It's okay to lose a debuff on 25%, but let the whole skill happen first, then apply the mastery so that I don't lose like critical components of a hero's ability in the middle of the flow, which I can't actually stop.
Yeah. No, I understand for sure. Go ahead, Dirk. Sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Just pointing out like those low roll chance. And then like, yeah, polymorph is another classic example of just being like way too big a swing of like 75% nothing happens. The 25% of the time you just lose the fight. And it's like, why does that exist? You can't like not use debuffs. Like that's not the winning strategy. So you just have to accept that 25% of the time.
It is. I mean, that's what you end up doing. You would kind of go, okay, well, how do I counter polymorph? Well, I can go stone skin. It's like, oh, wait, no, I can't because that just gets removed if I debuff. Okay, so I can't do that. I need resistance, but I need accuracy to be able to land the debuffs first. So I can't really stack enough resistance to stop it. And then even if I get to 6-star, they have like unresistible polymorph. So that doesn't work. So you just go, I just won't bring debuffs. So then all you start doing is going, well, I'll just pick damage dealers that have 100% ignore defense, and I'll pick buff champions that just means that I don't die, and you end up in this like very stagnant meta. And it's just their implementation, right? They made a change. They made it so that it used to be per debuff. So it used to be every single debuff roll. It was awful. And then we were like, oh, they're changing it. It's going to be just one debuff attempt. Great. But then anyone could have it because they changed it. So that now it's like, well, actually, when you work out 4-6 stars across the team, well, that's back to like 60% chance if you AoE debuff. So it's like the effect is okay. The implementation and how it modifies your character is the punishment. And it's like,
yeah, well, it's too extreme of like, Fear was bad when you just like 50-50 to skip a turn. This is well beyond that. And at least like there's a, okay, then I'll wear immunities because a lot of times, and this is true in like card games, a lot of times you just have to play as if the RNG is 100% in the way that you don't want it to go, because then you're accounting for it, you're playing your best around it. Now, if you're behind, you have to take the risk and just do it. But if you're ahead, you can just say, well, why would I want to take that risk? I'm just going to assume I'm going to lose the fear and all my guys will be feared. So to counter that, I'm going to bring a team with, immunity gear on. And then I don't have to take the risk of hoping that their 100% chance fear is going to screw me over, because I know it will. So yeah, you can play around, but like polymorph is kind of like, well, what do you, like you say, I guess you just have to just bring a different team. But is that how viable is that team? I guess I'm a little out of the loop now in the meta. Is that?
I mean, they are now actively putting pretty hard counters in. They put new artifact sets that make you 50-50 on but again, it's like, it's RNG on RNG. I mean, we haven't really talked about RNG layering, but that's essentially what they're doing now. It's like, well, there's a 25% chance that you could get polymorph, but here's an artifact set that gives you a 50% chance that the 25% chance doesn't happen. And then even if that doesn't happen, there's like I'm like, how many like mathematical formulas do I need? Yeah.
Yeah, this was like the solution to stone skin, which was a problem because it's 50% chance to not be strippable in the first place. So this is
just layering
the solution to these.
It's not great. I mean, they did just add a new lizard that literally made your entire team immune to polymorph, which that's going to be my point.
Is they're probably creating a pain point so that then they can release the
solution
and have it be desirable. Yeah.
Yes, but then there's a balance, right? So yes, you create pain points in the sense that maybe you've released a number of very strong defensive units, and now your damage dealers you have in the game are not capable of taking them down. Okay, well then you either introduce a set or you introduce new champions that now lift up to that level. That is healthy progression of like problem, here's a solution, problem, here's a solution. When you make the problem so egregiously horrendous that 70% of your champions can't engage with the game mode, there's a line to this problem solving that we no game should ever come to. Like if you're literally saying that most of the champions in the game, the debuff cannot be used in any capacity because it will probably just be a waste of your time. Like you've almost like you've created a problem that you can't even solve. And I think that's kind of what they did with polymorph and stone skin to some extent. They wanted to stop the speed meta, so they found a solution, found a problem, put it in there, and then they made the problem so strong, or the solution to the original problem so strong that then the next solution wasn't there. Like that we talk about this A, B, C, D kind of concept. It's like, or A, B, B, D, whatever we call it, where it's like, well, you create one problem with a solution, but then that will create another solution to the original problem. And you have this like natural meta loop where it's like, well, if Rotus is the best one in the game, then now all of a sudden people who are strong affinity to Rotus and people who can multi-hit, all of a sudden their value goes up. which eventually means at some point, once enough of them exist, Rotus's value goes down, and then you start bringing a counter to the ones that are multi-hit negative affinity. Like it should be a natural balance. Whereas I feel like with Stone Skin and Polymorph, they made them so universally powerful that there wasn't really enough counters that, you are playing the game of RNG, and in PvP, people spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to build like the strongest possible champion, and then you just walk in, you go, sorry mate, 3%. Sorry mate, 25%. That's bad RNG to me. That's when RNG is just so out of control that it's unenjoyable. You want it to be enjoyable.
In a card game, you just keep grinding them out. But like in Arena, you don't get that many runs per day anyways, so you can't really just grind them out. There's some days you're going to go into it, you get your runs in, and you got poor luck that day. That day is going to feel so bad to you. Like, glad I logged in to get this done today. Like, just, I'm sure this is how Brad felt at Otter Duel when you got.
Yeah, no, it eventually made me quit the game. I had like a stretch of 2 or 3 days, and I was like, okay, screw it, I'm done.
Yeah, you catch a streak of just 10 bad runs, and you're just like, why am I playing this mode again? Why do I keep going?
Why do I do this myself?
Yeah. It was their turning point for me, and I was a spender too. So yeah, we have to try to really avoid those horrible moments that make people just feel hopeless and want to quit. But I know we got some design meetings to get to. Is there anything we didn't get to touch on that you guys wanted to make sure you got in today?
No, I think just like summarizing what we're saying is like negative, unavoidable RNG is really what we try to avoid. I think that's what we certainly where our heads are at. It's like, obviously every game is RNG. You're not going to be able to summon one shot and get every champion in the game. You're not going to be able to just do things consistently. There needs to be a power curve, right? If every champion could do everything, then there's no champion that can do nothing. So there's no balance to it. So obviously there will always be levels of RNG. There will always be levels of, it'd be so much better if this just did it 100%. But there's also a line where it's like, well, we're not going to like negatively give you no choice. You just have to accept the bad RNG, right? There should always be strategies and pros. And I think generally we want to avoid as well, like multi-layered RNG, where it's like you need to be a math professor to figure out what's the actual probability of anything happening in this game. So it's a fun challenge. It's so hard to find the balance, really, because like we've had our design discussions and you've said, oh, this is good RNG, and I'm like, this is the worst experience. Why have you done this? This is terrible. I don't like it. And it's quite funny how we different opinions, and I think we do a really good job of. I think we'll find a good balance. I'm pretty confident, but it's hard.
We've got plenty of characters that do not have a 100% chance to land something, but then we have plenty of characters that do have a 100% chance. So it's like you'll get those the chances to high roll with some of your characters, but less consistent. But if you want the consistency, there'll be enough options of consistency. It's not just like, well, we've baked this mechanic into the game where you're going to fail, and if you don't want to fail, bring Ghostborn. Like that's not the good way of doing it. Yeah, it should be just as many options that work consistently as rely on high rolls that do something else better. So it's definitely a much healthier balance of characters, I think, in our game. Hopefully, because of that should be less frustrating.
Yeah, thanks guys, and also thanks to all of you for making it this far in the video if you're still here, and we'll provide all the links that you need down below. Let us know in the comment section, let us know on Discord your thoughts on subjects like RNG. We definitely read all the input, and we try to implement as much feedback as we can in the game from the community and all of you watching this video. So appreciate you guys for joining me, Dirk, Paul, and we will see you soon in the next episode. Cheers.